Look around you right now. Just take a second. Look at the world you live in, the hospital where you were born, the university where you studied, the courtroom where you expect a fair trial, the ballot box where you cast a vote. We walk through these institutions every single day. We take them completely for granted. They feel like the default setting of humanity, right? Like they were always going to happen. Just the natural evolution of civilization. But they weren't. What if I told you that the operating system of the modern world, the source code for the way we treat the sick, the way we handle knowledge, and the way we govern nations can be traced back to a single, impossible point of origin? A single man. A man who lived 2,000 years ago in a dusty, irrelevant corner of a brutal empire. A man who never wrote a book, never commanded an army, never held political office, and who was executed by the state in the most humiliating way possible before he hit the age of 35. This doesn't make sense. By the laws of history, this man should have been forgotten 10 minutes after his death, but he wasn't. Today, we are opening a case file on the most unlikely architect of Western civilization, Jesus of Nazareth. We are going to trace the invisible lines connecting a first-century carpenter to the ambulance siren you hear outside your window and the diploma hanging on your wall. The story is stranger and much more specific than you think. Let's look at the evidence. First, we have to look at the unlikely candidate. If you were betting on who would shape the next 2 millennia of human history in the year 30 AD, you wouldn't bet on Jesus. You'd bet on Caesar. You'd bet on the guys with the gold eagles and the legions. Rome was the superpower. It was a machine of war, engineering, and law. It crushed dissent. It paved the world. And then you have this guy, Jesus. His resume is a disaster. Born in a stable, check. Raised in Nazareth, a town so small it doesn't even show up on contemporary maps, check. His career, 3 years of walking around, talking to fishermen, tax collectors, and prostitutes. He had no money, no weapons, no political leverage. And the ending? Crucifixion. We see crosses on jewelry today and forget what that actually meant. It wasn't a religious symbol. It was a billboard of terror used by Rome to say, "This is what happens when you mess with us." It was reserved for slaves and rebels. It was designed to erase you from history. So, how? How does a movement that starts with a public execution end up rewriting the moral DNA of the planet? It wasn't a conquest of swords. It was a conquest of ideas, a virus of the mind that was so radical, so counterintuitive, that it crashed the old system and installed a new one. Let's look at Exhibit A, the hospital. To understand this, you have to understand what it was like to get sick in the ancient world. Let's say it's the year 165 AD. You're in Rome. The Antonine Plague hits. Your neighbor starts coughing. He gets a fever. What do? If you are a typical Roman citizen, you don't bring him soup. You don't call a doctor because doctors are for the rich and they've already fled the city. You throw them out. Literally. You push the sick into the street to die so they don't infect your house. In a world built on survival of the fittest, mercy is a weakness. It's a math error. But then, observers noticed something weird happening. There was this cult, these Christians. While everyone else was running away from the plague, these people were running toward it. They were going into the infected houses. They were picking up the dying from the gutters. They were washing them, feeding them, sitting with them. Why? Because their leader, Jesus, had this stubborn, inconvenient teaching. What you do to the least of these, you do to me. They believed that every human being, slave, free, rich, poor, had the spark of the divine. This was a radical break from Roman logic. And it worked. Simple nursing care, water, food, hygiene drastically spiked survival rates. The Christians lived when others died. Their numbers grew. But they didn't stop at random acts of kindness. They systematized it. They built infrastructure. By the 4th century, you get the Basiliad in modern-day Turkey. This wasn't just a clinic. It was a city of mercy. It had housing for doctors, wards for different diseases, and a dedicated section for lepers, the ultimate outcasts. And the kicker? It was free, open to everyone. Pagan, Jew, Christian, it didn't matter. This is the invention of the hospital, a public institution dedicated to the care of strangers. Fast forward to 1751, Philadelphia. Benjamin Franklin and Dr. Thomas Bond found Pennsylvania Hospital, the first in America. Look at the seal. It's the Good Samaritan. The motto, take care of him and I will repay thee. That isn't a secular idea. That is a direct echo of a parable told by a Galilean peasant 1,700 years earlier. The very reason we have an ambulance system today is because of that shift in thinking. Now, Exhibit B, the university. There is this myth that faith and reason are enemies, that the church held back science. But when you look at the history of the university, that narrative falls apart. After Rome fell, the lights went out in Europe, the Dark Ages, literacy plummeted. Who saved the data? Who kept the hard drive of Western civilization from getting wiped? Monks. In drafty stone monasteries, men dedicated their entire lives to copying books by hand, and not just the Bible. They copied Aristotle, Plato, Galen, mathematics, astronomy. They believed that God was rational, so the universe must be rational. Therefore, studying the stars or logic wasn't a threat to faith, it was a way to understand the mind of God. These monastery schools grew, they got bigger, they started organizing. By the High Middle Ages, they evolved into the universitas. Bologna, Oxford, Paris, Cambridge, these were the first universities. And they were explicitly Christian projects. Theology was called the Queen of the Sciences because it provided the framework for all other knowledge. This DNA crossed the Atlantic. Look at the Ivy League, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. These weren't founded by secular governments. They were founded by Puritans and clergymen. Harvard's original mission statement, it's right there in the text, to know God and Jesus Christ, which is eternal life. That was the goal of the education. And it wasn't just for the elites. In 1647, Massachusetts passed a law with the most heavy metal name in legal history, the Old Deluder Satan Act. The logic was simple. Satan wants you to be ignorant so you can't read the Bible. Therefore, to fight the devil, we must teach every single child to read. That is the birth of public education in America. The drive for mass literacy was a spiritual drive. But here is the final piece of the puzzle, the one that affects your life right now, even if you never set foot in a church or a hospital. Exhibit C, the blueprint of government. We talk about human rights. We talk about equality. We talk about the rule of law. But where do those ideas come from? In the ancient world, they didn't exist. If you were a king, you were the law. If you were strong, you took what you wanted. Justice was for the powerful. Christianity introduced a terrifying idea to the powerful. The king is not God. The king is a man, and that man is under the same law as the peasant in the field. They both stand before the same ultimate judge. This is the seed of the rule of law. Look at the Magna Carta in 1215, the document that broke the absolute power of kings. Who was the intellectual force behind it? Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He used biblical theology to argue that the king was not above the law. Fast forward to the Declaration of Independence, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Why are your rights unalienable? Why can't the government take them away? Because the government didn't give them to you. God did. That distinction is the firewall that protects individual liberty. It comes from the Genesis idea that humans are made in the imago Dei, the image of God. That gives you value that no state, no dictator, and no majority vote can erase. This idea is the engine of reform. It's why the gladiatorial games ended. It's why the slave trade was fought by abolitionists like William Wilberforce. It's why the practice of widow burning in India was challenged. It is the belief that every life has weight. So, here is the verdict. You can debate the theology, you can argue about the miracles, but you cannot argue with the history. The structure of the modern world, the places we go to be healed, the schools we go to learn, and the rights we use to live freely is built on a foundation laid 2,000 years ago. We are walking through a civilization built on the teachings of the man from Nazareth. We are living in a house that he designed, and whether you believe in him or not, his influence is the air you breathe. I want to know what you think. Which of these three, the hospital, the university, or the government, do you think is the most surprising legacy? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to understand more about the hidden history of the ideas that shape us, click that subscribe button, because we are just scratching the surface. Thanks for watching.